Welcome to the Folk School on Willow Creek, featuring University Distinguished Professor Tom Ezern, singing and telling stories from the Salon on Willow Creek.
I need a bed for the night, boys, and my horses need hay. I've been riding that grove line on the Hotdish Highway, on the great western prairies. I do the work of the Lord. I saddle my pillow and I preach from my board. I ride by my compass and I steer by my star. Like the three holy wise men followed that beacon and came from afar. I need a bed for the night, boy, and my horses need hay. Been riding that road on the Hotdish Highway. Now it's a Wyoming scatter, this flock on the land. Coyotes and grizzlies will steal all they can, but the Lord is my shepherd, and I am his man. Still waters run deep in green pastures, asleep under his guiding hand. I need a bed for the night, boys, and my horses need hay. Been riding that road line on the Hotdish Highway. Now someday a wide steeple is gonna rise in the air. I'll preach from a pulpit, investments so fair. Thy grace is sufficient, and constant thy care. God bless this good land, and the work of our hands established there. I need a bed for the night, boys, and my horses need hay. I've been riding that grove line on the Hotdish Highway. I need a bed for the night, boys, riding that grub line on the Hotdish Highway. Well, all the stanzas of our old theme song, the Hotdish Highway, tonight seemed appropriate. We're at some kind of a milestone. I'm not sure what, whether it's a snowbound record here, or no, it's wrapping up the 2022 season of the Willow Creek Folk School. It's number 124. We're at basically 2.5 years of doing this thing, Dr. K. And so it's maybe getting a little bit reflective about this, but one thing we should reflect upon is if the theme song is the Hotdish Highway, what is the Hotdish Highway? What is the hot dish of the plains?
Are you going to narrow it down to one?
Well, and people are not to answer Dr. Suzanne Kelly as to what is the hot dish of the plains. What's the hot dish of the plains? If you're out there, you know how to have one. Let's hear from you.
Some people are contributing.
Oh, they're already chipping in.
Yes.
And be sure to post some recipes, or at least, vague instructions for your favorite hot dish. What is yours, Dr. K?
My favorite hot dish?
Yeah.
Well, it's one that was served at some friends of ours. I don't know what all was in it. It was hamburger and kind of a hamburger gravy and wild rice. And I'm not sure what else was in it, but it was
Oh,
so
yeah,
good.
I know the one you meant.
I'm pretty sure that Erin Yellowbird made it, but it might not have been her, but it was when we were saying
Or one of her
farewell
guests.
to the Yellowbirds.
Yeah, one of their guests or something like that.
It was so good, but it was kind of like a hamburger gravy set up in a hot dish.
I have to vote for the old-fashioned ham and potato hot dish.
Yeah, we disagree on that because I don't think the ham and potato version is really what a hot dish is about.
Well,
That's a casserole.
indeed. At some point, tater tots are going to come up. No. What's the difference between a casserole and a hot dish?
Ham or beef. I don't know.
I think our friends from Southern some more southerly points may be more familiar with the casserole term, and in these parts, the hot dish term.
Actually, also maybe farther north in Alaska as well.
That's off the map.
Casserole.
That's just off the map. Hey, I don't think we should let the occasion pass without saying a word about some news that came from our friend of our household here, John Lauk, our fellow historian, John Lauk, whose father, Dale Wayne Lauk, passed away yesterday. And a beloved member of the community, and I mean that not in just a casual way when I say of the community. John writes in basically the first draft of the obituary, I would say.
I would guess that was. Yeah.
Dale Wayne Lauk passed away at 9:01 p.m. today, December 15, 2022, in room 118, Madison Community Hospital, just as an ice storm and blizzard was hitting eastern South Dakota. And then, after quite a bit of biographical detail, John notes about his father. Dad was a joiner and a goer. VFW on Friday nights, chalupas at El Vaquero, the old Pizza Hut, after church on Saturday night, the Nunda Bar for fish fry, card parties, 30-point pitch, pinochle, 500, camping trips to the North Coast Fest in North Dakota, and Czech Days in Tabor, and Schmeckfest in Freeman, and German Fest in Sioux Falls, fishing and golfing and snowmobiling back when he had more strength. The point is that he was involved in his community and he cared about it, John writes. Isn't that a tribute right there? And then he goes on to say, the big problem we all face is that there are fewer and fewer people like my dad. These were the dependable people, the people who showed up, the pillars of community who made things run. A fine tribute to a fine man. I wish I'd known him.
And you didn't mention, but John's parents had been married for 68 years.
68. I knew it was way over 50. 68 years. Yeah, how about that? My word. I told you last night I made a call to our friend Jim Hoy in Kansas. Mm-hmm. And his birthday, we're not going to give a number, Jim. It's just a number, after all. It's just a number, but thought ringing up on his birthday. And you know what I found him doing?
What was he doing?
He was being Jim Hoy.
Was he out riding a horse?
No, well, that would be Jim Hoy also, but he was being Jim Hoy. He had a good the winter night. He had a good fire in the wood stove, and he was reading and writing. For those who don't know about the relationship, Jim and I have a long literary partnership going back to 1983, writing the Kansas newspaper version of Plains Folk, which is up to 2,074 columns, I believe now. I don't know how many of this. It's well over 1 million words in print from that feature that we swap weeks on writing. It runs in a number of newspapers. In addition, of course, I do the radio version here in North Dakota on Prairie Public Radio. But more than that, beyond a literary partnership, there's an old and long friendship there. And, I wasn't going to mention any numbers, but, Jim has a few years on me, even, which means that I learned quite a bit from that man and continue to learn from him about the profession, about expression, and about, shall we say, grace. We're spreading thanks all around here and appreciation all around. Anything good happened in NDSU Press, or are you just goofing off this week?
Well, it is holiday coming up, you know.
No, it's not.
Actually, today our editorial board members met along with some of our series editors. Kind of a meet and greet and get to know new faces that are working among us, but also the board elected to certify 4 new books that will be publishing late 23, maybe early 2024. So they've set out another work program for me.
Oh, you have been wicked the past year, so there's no rest to come. There we go. Changing the weather's made everything a little unstable, I suppose. If you see me kind of cringing out here, you know, it's from moving too many tons of snow in the past couple of days. And I literally mean that, tons. And it seemed this week like this is the week to trot out young Charlotte. Now, every year around New Year's, you know, I keep saying every year, and we're in the 3rd year of the Willow Creek Folk School. Now I act like it's been around for a million years, but each year we get around about this time to singing a song of young Charlotte, or sometimes called Fair Charlotte, sometimes called the Frozen Lover, but young Charlotte. One of the great ballads in the English language tradition of North America that you find all over the prairies, although it's interesting, of course, not so much, say, in Texas, and that's to be expected. It's a winter song. But oddly, it doesn't seem to be real prevalent in the North Dakota, Montana tier, but in the middle states, the Central Plains and on up into South Dakota, it had quite a heyday. And we're going to deposit young Charlotte in the songbag tonight. I hope it's warm in there for the poor woman. And that means we're turning to Dr. Kelly for some background on the song. Give us some provenance on this great ballad.
All right. A ballad popular across the country, including the Central and Northern Plains, Young Charlotte originated as a poem by a publisher, satirist, and popular writer named Seba Smith. He published the song as A Corpse Going to a Ball in a Maine newspaper, The Rover, in 1843. His poem was based on a newspaper article in the New York Observer about an incident reported to have taken place the night of January 1, 1840. The poet, Smith, was born in a log cabin on the Maine frontier in 1793 and lived in Maine until moving to New York in about 1840. The newspaper narratives about the episode of January 1, 1840, are all from New York and refer to the happening up here in the country and to the north of New York City, which might have meant Maine or upstate New York. Although both the poem and the song springing from it date the tragic episode as having happened on New Year's Eve, that is the result of the poet misreading press reports, which refer first to the first day of January 1840, and after that specify the night of that day was to be observed as is usual here by a New Year's ball. The newspaper story provides the narrative substantially as the ballad would render it. Young Charlotte, ignoring her mother's advice to dress warmly as she rides into the night with her beau, Charles, then freezing to death on the way to a ball. The story provides an indirect summary of dialogue taking place during the journey. Here is an excerpt from the newspaper rendition. She was young and gay, and her charms of youth and beauty never were lovelier than when dressed for that New Year's ball. Of course, too thinly clad for the season, and especially for that dreadful day, She had not gone far before she complained of being cold, very cold. But their anxiety to reach the end of their ride in time to be present at the opening of the dance induced them to hurry onward without stopping by the way. Not long after this complaining, she said that she was perfectly comfortable, was now quite warm, and that there was no necessity of delay on her account. They reached at length the house where the company were gathering. The young man leaped from the sleigh and extended his hand to assist her out, but she did not offer hers. He spoke to her, but she answered not. The original poem by Smith comprises 10 8-line stanzas. The origins of the several tunes to which it has been sung are all unknown. The ballad was widespread and popular across the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The song inspired a kitschy commercial product known as a young Charlotte, a little white ceramic, as in Frozen, figure that was carried as a doll, worn as a pendant, and sometimes baked into a cake as a party favor.
Well, we know what to get Dr. Kelly for Christmas stocking this year. You have any context in on the spread of this ballad?
All right. Reconstruction of the textual origin of the ballad would be speculative, as there is no good evidence it is based on actual historical events. But information about its popular currency and performative context is intriguing. The popularity of young Charlotte figurines implies a child, young adult constituency. It appears the song was sung and loved in many situations, but there is a definite pattern of popularity centered in gatherings of young people. For instance, a press report from Wahpeton, North Dakota, in January 1889, describes a surprise party given for an older gentleman called Uncle Peter, an affair at which young folks dominated the proceedings, playing traditional play party games, popping corn, bobbing for apples, and singing songs, including Young Charlotte. The narrative has the air of fiction, but it illustrates the appropriation of the song as a scary spoof song for youngsters. A reminiscent article from Cedar Vale, Kansas in 1923 recalls how popular Young Charlotte was at literary meetings, another venue where old and young mingled and partook of their own meanings to the song. Certainly, the popularity of Young Charlotte owes much to its artful incorporation of dialogue. Indeed, the instances of dialogue mark the progress of the plot in dramatic as well as traditional fashion.
Young Charlotte lived on a mountainside in a wild and lonely spot. There were no dwellings for 3 miles wide except her father's cot. And yet on many a winter night young swains should gather there, for her father kept a social board and she was very fair. One New Year's Eve as the sun went down, far looked her wishful line. Out from the frosty window pane as the merry sleighs dashed by. At the village 15 miles away was to be a ball that night, and though the air was piercing cold, her heart was warm and light. How brightly beamed her laughing eye as a well-known voice she heard, and dashing up the cottage door, her lover's sleigh appeared. Oh, daughter dear, her mother cried, this blanket round you fold, for 'tis a dreadful night abroad, you'll catch your death of cold.
Here, Charlotte's mother initiates the first dialogue in the song, dialogue being a common element of traditional balladry. Her overwrought rhetoric, dreadful night, and get your death of cold, is key to the process by which the ballad in circulation, evolved from a cautionary tale into a youthful lark of a scare story. The phrases that once induced shivers came to prompt eye rolls.
Oh nay, young Charlotte cried, and she laughed like a gypsy queen. She cried in blankets muffled up, I never would be seen. My silken cloak is quite enough, no, 'tis lying throughout, and there's my silken scarf to twine my head and neck about. Her bonnet and her gloves were on, she jumped into the sleigh, and swift they sped down the mountainside and o'er the hill away. With muffled beat so lively, 5 miles at length were passed, when Charles with few and shivering words the silence broke at last.
At this point, Charles is about to initiate the second dialogue of the song, whereby dialogue becomes the key marker of plot development.
Such a dreadful night I never saw, the reins I scarce can hold. Young Charlotte faintly then replied, I am exceeding cold. He cracked his whip, he urged his steed much faster than before, and thus 5 other dreary miles in silence they passed o'er. Spoke Charles, how fast the freezing ice is gathering on my brow, and Charlotte still more faintly said, I'm growing warmer now.
The third dialogue element is feeble, containing no direct quotation in reply, symbolic of the fading of Charlotte's life.
Thus on they rode to the frosty air and the glittering cold starlight, until at last the village lamps and the ballroom came in sight. They reached the door where Charles sprang out, and he held his hands to her. Why sit you like a monument that hath no power to stir? He called her once, he called her twice, she answered not a word. He asked her for her hand again, but still she never stirred.
Dialogue reaches its fateful end in its 4th iteration. Charlotte is gone.
He took her hand in his, 'twas cold and hard as any stone.
The stone-like feel of Charlotte's hand is a possible inspiration for the white ceramic figurines inspired by her story.
He tore the mantle from her face, and the cold stars o'er it shone. Then quickly to the lighted hall her lifeless form he bore. Young Charlotte's eyes had closed for aye, her voice was heard no more.
In the end, the ballad confirms Charlotte's death by the fact that she no longer responds in dialogue. Her voice was heard no more.
Indeed. We did mention it's like a made-up story, right?
You did, yes.
Okay. No one thinks
But everybody knows it could happen.
it could happen. Remember that.
Did you read this?
No, I'm done with those pages. Yeah, it could happen. Which reminds us, we got those grandkids headed.
Oh.
Probably somewhere around Cedar Vale, Kansas right now, where they were singing The Frozen Lover in 1923.
Let's not equate the two stories.
No.
Grandkids on the way north.
Indeed. Have any interesting guests checking in on the chat line tonight, Dr. K?
Well, you might want to follow up on some of the Hotdish.
Oh, I'd like to hear them.
Well, John and Melvina Heisch have a really good one. It's called Tallarina casserole.
It's what?
Tallarina.
Tallarina.
It has spaghetti and cheese and other items in it. MJ, her hot dish casserole is chicken soup. I don't know if you can count that as a casserole or a hot dish. Chicken soup.
If you put enough glop in it, maybe it's a hot dish.
Now, Kyle Jansen pops in with a recipe that has not ham, not beef. Can you guess?
Not ham, not beef.
Yeah.
Tuna.
It's got tuna, yes. You know that had to come.
That's an abomination. Say just a word here in a little while about the Willow Creek Folk School and how it's come along a little bit of a road in the last 2.5 years. But one of the things it's about is discovery. And so just like the first of this week, it was one of those times, 5 in the morning, I'm deep into some town in Montana where a forgotten balladeer has suddenly reared his head in into my research sites. And in this case, it was a man named Prall. It's a man named Prall. Wait, what's his initials? What's his initials here? Yeah, H.E. Prall, sometimes from Sand Creek, but he's around that Wolf Point area in northeastern Montana, the Highline country. So this is true northern Plains country. Sometimes living on the edge of the foothills of the Rockies there too, however, in central Montana. And I began to run across these ballads. He has to have written scores of them. He was a farmer. He was a part-time logger, like winter employment. He'd go out with logging crews. And that was the first ballad of his that I ran across, the old logging camp. And I got a little bit of a kick out of his power of expression. I have sat with the rest on the deacon's seat when the evening the day's work done, round the old cannon stove with its terrible heat, where the finest of yarns were spun. And then he proceeds to deal them out over the late 1920s, and well into the 1930s, and into the 1940s. At some point, when does it happen here? I've got to notice. I stopped tracking him down here. Yeah, Reverend Prall. Okay, so he's a farmer, he's a logger, he's a sometime radio personality, and he's a preacher. Reverend H.E. Prall of the Sand Creek country had the misfortune last week, this is 6 March of 1931, to get his leg broken in 3 places. He was riding horseback and the horse slipped and fell with him. All right, those of you grandkids who are nuts about horses, you need to remember that stuff. Well, and then the stuff began to accumulate. And I realized I was on to another phenomenon, one of those discovery type mornings. And I did not wake up Dr. Kelly to hear about it, but she heard about it earlier in the morning than she cared to, and she was not impressed at the time. She's seldom impressed by anything before 9 in the morning, to tell the truth. But I think she will be here when she hears this ballad tonight. As a matter of fact, as I said, I'm going to need a little help with this one. This is Reverend Prall's Christmas ballad. I'm going to have to arrange it. Fair warning, this is a fairly long ballad.
So is the preparation for it.
Yeah, there's more pages than I thought. Here we go. Okay, you remember how we talked about it? I'll give you a nod, you pull the top page. I'll give you a nod, you pull this page. Pull this page, there we go. There's a total of 5 pages in there. Reverend Prall entitles this, A Christmas Pageant with a Practical Result. Now, I needed a tune for this. You'll probably recognize it. 'Twas Christmas Eve on the prairie, and we hovered round the fire. We could hear coyote wary. Seems as if he'd never tire. Some were thinking, softly talking, Christmas time they'd known before. That Christmas story some were mocking. They had no faith in Bible lore. Just the foreman sat unheeding, with his head so frosted o'er, bowed above his paper reading. Gone seemed our chatter to ignore. Gaunt was he, hard as flint rock, fearless, tireless, but without hate. We had seen him nurse the thin stock, and we knew his heart was gray. The wintry wind was wildly raging, and the night was a winter cold, and the howling blast was waging war upon the young and old. Now lean and hungry roamed the cattle, and the horses too were thin. We could hear the windows rattle while the fine snow sifted in. Suddenly there came a rapping. Surprise was written on each face, and it sounded tapping, tapping. The foreman rose from up his place, and as he threw the door wide open, huddled in the biting storm, stood a man there blindly groping, and he saw a woman's form. Once within, he told his story, how they tried the village inn, but the landlord, though quite sorry, had no place for kith or kin. Sadly down the road they'd started, seeking shelter for the night, spent and lost and broken hearted. They had seen our feeble life. Well, no place had we for any woman, and the foreman's face grew red, but her patient eyes were brimming. We couldn't hear what the man had said, but we saw the changed expression flash across the foreman's face, and after that that, we had a session that upset the whole blamed place. Well, Kim the cook was heating water. Red was on the doctor's trail. All the fires were made much harder to resist the winter's gale. So the night passed, came the morning. Then we heard the baby's cries, though we'd had the doctor's warning. Every cowboy wiped his eyes as we lingered round the table. After breakfast time was done, one who'd called the story fable asked the boss in jest and fun, "Hey boss, what made you change so quickly when those folks came in that way? Though at first you looked quite sickly, you got busy right away." Well, then the boss, his old eyes snapping, shifted slightly, then replied, "Say, partner, did you ever happen to hear of Christ the crucified? You know, last winter when I made that visit to the folks back east, you know, they were fixing something so exquisite that I thought I'd see a show. Well, it was, I guess, sort of acting, though a pageant was what 'twas called, and the folks simply packed in till those ushermen were stalled. Well, it was the Christmas story. Called it fable, call it fact. Christ the child in all his glory was the center of each act. Well, you all know the claims of history. Shepherds merged of fact and mystery. Came that Christmas star, all these guiding men afar. But the bad fact that made me wonder as I saw that pageant play was the landlord's foolish blunder when he turned the pair away. Well, Merry Christmas from the Highline Country this year. Well, you know, Dr. Kelly, your work's not done here tonight.
No.
I'm going to invite you to step over here, take my place, and I'll take yours for a minute. And what do you have for us there?
Well, you asked me to read a passage from My Antonia. And this passage will probably be familiar to some of you who have been following along with us over these years. But this is a Christmas scene with the Shimmer Does.
This goes right in there with the Book of Luke, A Charlie Brown Christmas, and Cather. Right?
Covers all the bases. On Christmas morning, when I got down to the kitchen, the men were just coming in from their morning chores. The horses and pigs always had their breakfast before we did. Jake and Otto shouted, "Merry Christmas," and winked at each other when they saw the waffle irons on the stove. Grandfather came down, wearing a white shirt and his Sunday coat. Morning prayers were longer than usual. He read the chapters from St. Matthew about the birth of Christ, and as we listened, it all seemed like something that had happened lately and near at hand. In his prayer, he thanked the Lord for the first Christmas and for all that it had meant to the world ever since. He gave thanks for our food and comfort and prayed for the poor and destitute in great cities where the struggle for life was harder than it was here. Grandfather's prayers were often very interesting. He had the gift of simple and moving expression. Because he talked so little, his words had a peculiar force. They were not worn dull from constant use. His prayers reflected what he was thinking about at the time, and it was chiefly through them that we got to know his feelings and his views about things. After we sat down to our waffles and sausage, Jake told us how pleased the Shimmerdas had been with their presents. Even Ambrose was friendly and went to the creek with him to cut the Christmas tree. It was a soft, gray day outside with heavy clouds working across the sky and occasional squalls of snow. There were always odd jobs to be done about the barn on holidays, and the men were busy until afternoon. Then Jake and I played dominoes, while Otto wrote a long letter home to his mother. He always wrote to her on Christmas Day, no matter where he was and no matter how long it had been since his last letter. All afternoon he sat in the dining room. He would write for a while, then sit idle, his clenched fist lying on the table, his eyes following the pattern of the oilcloth. He spoke and wrote his own language so seldom that it came to him awkwardly. His effort to remember entirely absorbed him. At about 4 o'clock, a visitor appeared, Mr. Shimmerda, wearing his rabbit skin cap and collar and new mittens his wife had knitted. He had come to thank us for the presents and for all of Grandmother's kindnesses to his family. Jake and Otto joined us from the basement, and we sat about the stove, enjoying the deepening gray of the winter afternoon and the atmosphere of comfort and security in my grandfather's house. This feeling seemed completely to take possession of Mr. Shimmerda. I suppose in the crowded clutter of their cave, the old man had come to believe that peace and order had vanquished from the earth, or existed only in the old world he had left so far behind. He sat still and passive, his head resting against the back of the wooden rocking chair, his hands relaxed upon the arms. His face had a look of weariness and pleasure, like that of sick people when they feel relief from pain. Grandmother insisted on his drinking a glass of Virginia apple brandy after his long walk in the cold, and when a faint flush came up in his cheeks, his features might have been cut out of shell, they were so transparent. He said almost nothing and smiled rarely, but as he rested there, we all had a sense of his utter content. As it grew dark, I asked whether I might light the Christmas tree before the lamp was brought. When the candle ends sent up their conical yellow flames, all the colored figures from Austria stood out clear and full of meaning against the green boughs. Mr. Shimmerda rose, crossed himself and quietly knelt down before the tree, his head sunk forward. His long body formed a letter S. I saw grandmother look apprehensively at grandfather. He was rather narrow in religious matters and sometimes spoke out and hurt people's feelings. There had been nothing strange about the tree before, but now, with someone kneeling before it, images, candles. Grandfather merely put his fingertips to his brow and bowed his venerable head, thus Protestantizing the atmosphere. We persuaded our guest to stay for supper with us. He needed little urging. As we sat down to the table, it occurred to me that he liked to look at us and that our faces were open books to him. When his deep-seeing eyes rested on me, I felt as if he were looking far ahead into the future for me, down the road I would have to travel. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Shimerda lighted one of our lanterns and put on his overcoat and fur collar. He stood in the little entry hall, the lantern and his fur cap under his arm, shaking hands with us. When he took grandmother's hand, he bent over it as he always did and said slowly, "Good woman." He made the sign of the cross over me, put on his cap, and went off in the dark. As we turned back to the sitting room, grandfather looked at me searchingly. "The prayers of all good people are good," he said quietly.
We'll just stay there a moment. We have we need to talk about the rest of the year here quickly.
Oh, okay. Sure.
We've got a fairly heavy travel schedule and actual, life stuff with family and that sort of thing over the next several weeks. And so there will be a 3-week hiatus. This then is the conclusion of the 2022 season of the Willow Creek Folk School. And we'll be back with number 125 on the 13th of January. So no folk school next week, the week after that, or the week after that, January 6th, when we'll be in Albuquerque, won't we? We'll be back here in the salon on the 13th of January and streaming toward you.
Friday the 13th?
Friday the 13th of January, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. Now, you might come in here and check back in on the jack vine for us.
Okay.
I'll come back to try to close this year's folk school out with a reasonable grace. Who was it who was writing earlier today that growing up in a Catholic household, it was the nuns. I think it was Joe Gardewin might have been saying that. The nuns wouldn't let them sing Away in a Manger because that's, at least in sort of Lutheran mythology, Luther's cradle hymn, it's known. But there's no particular evidence that Luther wrote that. But we rewrote it anyway, wherever it came from. Now those grandkids who are on their way here now, may they arrive safely and in good spirits. They have their own version of Away in the Manger. It's the prairie version, which we're about to render for you here. I don't know. As a grandfather, I have tended to introduce a lot of animals into conversation. Kids and grandkids will remember the games that we played. Who would win if, who would win if, a jackrabbit fought with a badger? Okay, who would win if a badger fought with a coyote? Okay, all the animals. Well, then it went into Away in the Manger. Away in a manger, no crib for a bed. The little Lord Jesus laid down his Sweethead, the stars in the sky look down where he lay. The little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay. Now the coyotes were howling, dogs barking too. The pig, he was grunting, and the cow, she went moo. The rooster was crowing at sunrise to say, dress all the poor animals on this Christmas day. Out here on the prairie, the snow lies so deep. We think of baby Jesus in the manger, asleep, but warm as the stable and soft as the hay. So sleep, baby Jesus, on this Christmas day. Well, we have things to be thankful for, I think, in this season. One of them is that this year, and really over the past 2.5 years, the entire history of the Willow Creek Folk School, there have been people who have been hanging with us and dropping in and being kind to us here. And, you know, it seems to me there are several things that have shaped up from this little effort. One of those is discovery. This took me by surprise because I thought I knew about the old ballads. I learned all this stuff in the 1970s, you know, when I was singing ballads for a living as well as studying balladic literature in college and that sort of stuff. I was a lot smarter in those days because I discovered I knew very little, and actually most of us knew very little in those days. Now it's possible to discover the origins of so many songs that we thought just came from the mists of antiquity. All the old ones, Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie and so on, you know, they came from someplace in particular, which we can sort of tell you now after 2.5 years. But also, now it seems like every week I'm finding somebody like Reverend Prall or something like that, a forgotten balladeer of the Great Plains. You know, 3 weeks ago, it was the Ballad of Cherokee Bill, the Indian Territory's most notorious outlaw. And, another time it was that crazy populist ballad, Uncle Sam's Cow, the monstrous cow stretching across the entire United States, eating up farmers' profits. And, oh, this is such a delight to unearth this stuff that had its heyday here. This was the literature of the land, and so much of it was forgotten, but to be able to bring it back. So discovery. But another thing is interpretation. Now, again and again, I'll say to Dr. Kelly as I'm prepping some material here, I'll say something like, I've been thinking all wrong about this song. Like Young Charlotte, for years I just missed the true literary quality of that ballad. That business of using dialogue in such an artful fashion to carry the plot. Oh, that's great. Or when it struck me that the Trail to Mexico, which is, everybody thinks it's this ballad about a poor cowboy whose sweetheart has done him dirty, and I began to suspect, oh, wait a minute, this guy is off the hook, and he's actually kind of happy about it. How all these, buried in these ballads that we have mouthed over the generations, there is meaning that was written into them at the outset, which we haven't carried, but let's pick it up and carry it again. So the interpretation of them. A third thing, Dr. K, delightful, is the aspect of partnership.
Yes.
You made a big mistake when you threw in on this outfit 2.5 years ago, didn't you?
Well, there were a lot of things they didn't tell me. But.
That's right. But it simply would not be possible without you, and that's pretty much the story of my whole life.
You're a sweetheart.
And then finally, there is this thing, people gathering around. People like it when there's a fireplace on because it's that business we're gathering around the fire. But it gets a little hot and it throws a guitar out of tune. That happened here tonight. I've got the ring light here, and so we're gathering about something in the center of things. I know there's an artificial aspect of being linked across many hundreds of miles and even thousands of miles and oceans sometimes by digital communications. But there's a sort of community there. And we enjoy hearing from you and being with you on a Friday night. Out here on the prairie, the snow lies so deep, especially tonight. We think of baby Jesus in the manger asleep. But warm is the stable and soft is the hay. So sleep, baby Jesus, until Christmas Day. With a deer in the antelope play, but seldom is heard a discouraging word in the sky. Skies are not cloudy all the day. No, the skies are not cloudy all day.
We now conclude today's edition of the Folk School on Willow Creek. We invite you to join us again Friday the 13th of January for more songs and stories.